Welcome everybody to week 5 of 7 of the Climate INNOVAR. I am surprised to see such wonderful attendance, but happily so. But we have a very special guest tonight. Our topic is on ecosystems, and we have a special guest who's Nolan Kelly. And Nolan is the manager at Darcy Partners, a firm that's dedicated to technology and innovation scouting in the power and utilities industry. Darcy contracts with some of the largest utilities in the USA to provide a platform for identifying and sourcing innovative technologies to support their operations, customer programs, and asset management efforts. Nolan has a master's in public policy from UC San Diego, my former employer, and an undergraduate degree from Oregon State University, which is one of the most innovative campuses in this country. Nolan has previously worked as a consulting economist for Bonneville Power Administration on energy efficiency modeling efforts, as well as in consulting for the federal government, where he supported programs like Better Buildings Challenge and Energy Star. So we're really happy to have Nolan here tonight to talk about not only his company, but also our topic of ecosystems. Welcome, Nolan.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I hope you guys are looking at the right screen, maybe.
Yeah, we got it.
Very good. Okay. So today we're going to go ahead and start off by talking a little bit about Darcy Partners and how we function in terms of scouting and sort of understanding the different tech ecosystems that we cover through our services. So we'll talk just a little bit about how we do it. So don't worry, no sales pitch. And then we'll jump into talking a little bit about hydrogen in detail. So we'll talk about sort of the hydrogen economy, different methods of production for hydrogen, and then different uses for hydrogen. Just as an FYI for everyone here, this is a part of a presentation that we delivered for SoCalGas. So SoCalGas being the major gas utility in Southern California. I think also the largest gas utility in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. And so we looked at a number of different technology areas. So in this presentation, we're just going to isolate hydrogen and talk only about that. As I'm going, if people have questions, please put them in the chat or even unmute or raise your hand. I can see everyone's faces on my view, so I can tell when you raise your hand. And I'll do my best to call on people if anyone wants to say anything or has a reaction. So happy to, be a little dynamic on that front. All right, jumping in. So, we do tech scouting of these various technical areas that are adjacent to primarily utility operations, right? Also generation owners, other folks like that. We help them understand the tech ecosystem surrounding different products that they might want to buy, invest in, or integrate into their services. So there's a whole variety of products, right? You can imagine hydrogen generation technologies. That's one class of product. There's about 1 million others, right? So veg management, transformers, all sorts of things. So, when we dive into one of these topic areas and start exploring it, the first thing we do typically is break a problem down into something that we call a landscape. And we use these as sort of a buzzy thing that we actually sell and productize. However, in this case, the more conceptual understanding of it is really important. So, the landscape we're looking at here, we'll look at on our next slide, but essentially this is just breaking out the different methods for decarbonization of a gas utility and that gas utility's customers. So, we want to break it out on a high level, be able to understand and classify the different drivers of some issue in a technical space. So, maybe if you're looking at hydrogen production, maybe your issue isn't decarb, maybe your issue is you want to try and get hydrogen hubs, amped up and producing more hydrogen to support a broader array of industry, right? So the questions don't always have to be so huge, they can be a little more confined. But the important part is that you sort of break that out and go through an exercise of trying to understand the space and, really put that onto paper with these sort of discrete buckets of drivers. The next really important thing is to understand the context around a product, right? So you don't just need to understand pyrolyzers, electrolyzers in hydrogen production. You need to understand everything around there, right? Who uses hydrogen? What can you even use hydrogen for? Where can you apply it in industry? What products can actually take hydrogen? What products have been sort of tested with hydrogen? And what products can you just safely assume hydrogen can be, blended into the fuel stock for those products? You want to understand everything downstream, but also everything upstream, right? So you can imagine, right here I have pictured transformers. Transformers are a major bottleneck, right? So when you think about transformers, you really want to think about the availability of transformers. They're not so available because they take a long time to make. And then once you make them, they're a big pain in the butt. So the stuff over there on the right, that is mineral oil, and most transformers have some type of mineral oil in them. And so I just wanted to point this out because this is an example of sort of a bottleneck informed by the technology, right? Transformer oil is a real difficult thing to test. So once you get a transformer installed, testing it, pulling down these things, sending it off to a lab, that is a hugely tedious and complex process. Additionally, major temperature swings going on in there. And so you have a lot of issues around, like, can you even extract oil from these types of systems? So as you jump from technical area to technical area, trying to understand those spaces, you really want to pay attention to, like, where are the breaking points in the system? Right. So in the case of transformers, it's transformer supply and it's oil testing, basically. Those are your two major issues that you encounter. In other spaces, you might have other issues. And so you really want to pay attention to those bottlenecks and where they exist in your ecosystem that you're trying to study. The last thing here is diving deep. So once you have a good understanding of the environment around whatever you're looking at, whatever technology you're looking at, you want to dive deep and understand, I have a specific technology that I'm thinking about or that my company is working on. And where is that technology really deployable on the ground level, right? A lot of salespeople, if you talk to them, they'll almost always say, and they'll err toward the side of saying their products, have universal applicability. So you could take an electrolysis system and some storage for hydrogen, and you could deploy that anywhere to do more or less anything, right? But the way those systems are engineered, the way they're set up to operate, really informs their operating environment. So here I have a picture. Does anyone, out of curiosity, know what this picture is of? I'll give you a hint. It's a very old technology that had its heyday in the 1940s.
Converting vegetable oil to fuel?
Wood, actually, just, wood that you chop down. So this is called a wood gasifier. And you can run a wood gasifier to power a car. And the reason it was big in the 1940s is because World War II was happening. And when you were in Sweden, you couldn't get gasoline because there's no gasoline in Sweden and no one wanted to export gasoline to Sweden. So they had folks building these systems. And the idea here is, gasifiers as a technology, very broadly applicable. Today, you can find gasifiers all over Austria where they gasify most plastic that you throw away, right? And then they pump that right into your natural gas lines and they blend it. Wood gasifiers, a little bit less common, but they have their niche. And so understanding sort of where the niche is for a specific technology, super important to being able to commercialize that technology and make sure you execute on some sort of implementation process, right? So you want to make sure you really know where these technologies fit. And on the next couple slides, we'll talk about hydrogen in particular and where those technologies fit, and we can dive a little bit deeper there. So this is a quick look at the framework we developed looking at the drivers of decarbonization for gas utilities and their customers, right? And so the idea here is, you have a bunch of different levers that a utility can pull. Some of those levers are on the utility operations side. Some of those levers are on the end customer side. So you can see that outlined there with those orange blocks on the far left. Up top, we have greener supply. So you can think about things like, blending in hydrogen, maybe getting RNG off landfills, looking for alternative resources that you could use, some sort of fuel switching. That all fits under this sort of greener supply category. Then we have fugitive emissions. So those are just leaks, right? You've got compressor stations all over California distributing gas to different folks. They got to get from high pressure in the transmission lines to low pressure in the distribution lines. And you want to make sure that that happens seamlessly. But there are tons of leaks on those devices. So, leak reduction, also a major driver for limiting greenhouse gas emissions. And then all these other things in blue that you see, these are all drivers that take place on the end customer side. So particularly if you're an industrial end customer, you have some flexibility in terms of what you do, right? If you own a home and you're running a furnace, there's only so many kinds of furnaces you can buy. You can buy some gas ones, you can buy some electric ones, and that is about it. I guess you could buy a pellet fuel furnace if you wanted. But in any case, on the industrial side, you can take different fuels and you can swap them out. So, hydrogen substitutes for natural gas in a lot of different systems. Sometimes you just have to make small modifications to the combustion chamber. Sometimes you have to make bigger modifications. It depends on the system. You also have other opportunities, right? So you can leverage hydrogen to do some sort of arbitrage, right? So if you're on some sort of time of use pricing system and you want to leverage like a fuel cell, you could basically treat hydrogen production and use as a battery to hedge against, peak price times. There's a lot of these opportunities on the industrial side because you're making bigger purchases of energy. Those are all, within the realm of demand reduction, right? So reducing the overall volume of natural gas that you're going to consume, burn, and emit with. Then the last thing we have here is capturing emissions. So this is, right, kind of a pie in the sky technology, CCUS and carbon capture. So making sure that emissions, once the combustion takes place, are fixed and are put away somewhere. And that takes a ton of different forms. And we're not going to talk about that in too much depth here, but you can get a lot of byproducts out of that may or may not prove to be useful. A little later in the deck, we'll talk about pyrolyzers, and you get certain products off those, like you can get graphene off of those, and those have some applications, maybe not a ton in heavy industry, but so good to understand sort of where your waste products and your waste streams are going as well. Are there any questions about this slide?
I have a question about something you said. You mentioned you were getting graphite as a byproduct. Well, this had come up earlier. What do you do with that? And I'm like, I know that's used for pencils. And is that worth making money? You said on an industrial scale, but I'm thinking.
No, it's long story short, pencils are not a viable use for graphite in the volumes that you might produce it from pyrolysis. Things that people think about are like blending graphite in with concrete, blending it in with asphalt. There's certain construction materials. And I think the real reason there is it's just a bulk, like a matter of bulk, right? You need to move a lot of this stuff. And black carbon is, kind of abundant.
Thank you. Interesting.
Of course. So jumping forward, I'm skipping over a little bit of stuff for the sake of time here, but as we conducted our analysis looking into the, world of potential technologies that could impact emissions at industrial sites, we identified 3 priority ones. And so I'll just really briefly touch on them. So point source CCUS. So this is like distributed carbon capture sequestration. So this would happen on company sites. Then we have distributed hydrogen production and storage, and that is more or less what it says, right? So this is distributed production. You're not running hydrogen in a blend with natural gas through a pipeline. You're producing it on site in some capacity. And then the last thing we have here is thermal energy storage for process heat. So process heat is one of the biggest uses of energy, I think, globally. Process heat, don't quote me on it, but it's something like 60% of industrial energy use globally. So process heat is a huge component of industry decarb. There's also some other opportunities, right? More niche: cement production, electromagnetic heating, combustion modification, building envelopes, all for saving emissions via natural gas levers. So today we'll talk a little bit about this distributed hydrogen production and storage. All right, so this nice diagram on the right that you're seeing, we stole from Siemens, but it is a really beautiful diagram showing all the areas that the hydrogen economy theoretically could touch, right? So hydrogen, right? Like, what is it at its core? It's an energy carrying molecule, right? And so that's what's really handy about gasoline. It's what's really handy about natural gas. It's what's really difficult about electricity, right? You can't put electricity in a bucket and move it, but you can take hydrogen and put it in a very, albeit fancy bucket and move it. But it's easier than electricity in some instances. So, here, you're seeing where hydrogen can play into broader industry, and it can play in a lot of places, right? There's a lot of methods to produce hydrogen. You can go from everything from sort of traditional SMR, like steam methane reforming technologies, to newer sort of pyrolysis technologies, to sort of green electrolysis technologies. So there's lots of ways to produce it. So it has the potential to touch on a lot of different topics. I won't go through every key action item there on the left, but I will note that it's good to understand, these action items and where, any company that you're thinking about, where they sit in terms of this, right? So I'll talk about just one or two here. So expansion and acceleration of the capital base, right? People have to be investing in these topics. And so you want to pick topics or niches where there's active investment. People are trying to address an issue. You don't want to try to solve a problem that no one's interested in solving, because that, you're not going to get any money to do that. The last thing I'll say is, development of regulations. That seems very big brothery, governmenty, but actually incredibly important, incredibly vital, particularly in the energy sector. It's not just regulations, but like broad industry standardization. Right. So with hydrogen, a major issue is, how can you transport hydrogen? You run it through a steel pipeline, that steel embrittles, you hit it with a hammer, the steel explodes, or shatters, I should say. It doesn't explode. The explosion comes shortly after. And then, you really need to get industry all on one page about how they're going to go about, transforming, creating, transforming, and transporting these various products, right? So like making sure that stoves, are all certified to a standard that accepts hydrogen, making sure that boilers, can accept hydrogen with a modified combustion chamber. Those are all really important things, and pre-designing those combustion chambers. Otherwise, you're going to be building to order every product that everyone wants to build. And that's a pretty common problem in industry, particularly with hydrogen right now. So I was speaking to a utility out of Canada that's setting up a hydrogen demonstration hub, and they were saying, what kinds of products can we put in here? And the answer is, well, you can put any kind of product in there, but it's going to be built to order. It's going to cost a fortune, and you're going to have to do extensive lab testing in advance of installing it in a public setting, right? Because of safety issues. So, you can't do that for everyone's home. So, getting industry on board, getting other people to do, testing of devices, very important for enabling different segments of industry. Alrighty, so talking about sort of what does a hydrogen production facility look like? So this image we stole from Fraunhofer, but the idea here is, it's very flexible how you can structure these setups for generating and using hydrogen. You can use hydrogen for something as simple as basically like a big battery, right? You can use it for arbitrage purposes when electricity prices are high and low, right? Between like the late night and the mid-afternoon to late afternoon. So you can use it for something really simple like that. You could also use it to run some sort of boiler or a depiler, something in the fabrics or machinist industry. A lot of options there. The idea here is that you're super flexible on your inputs, right? So you've got natural gas as an input, you've got electricity as an input, you can sort of mix and match those based on the technology. And then you can use it in a variety of different ways. There's also significant transport opportunities. Sorry, we just got a question. I'm just gonna check it out real quick. Oh, no.
No, I'm sorry. It was a vocab, and then I Googled it. And then I just corrected myself because I was way off and I didn't want anyone to, sorry. You don't need to.
No worries, no worries. Just real quick, I'll back up a tiny bit. Yeah, pyrolysis is a process using electricity and natural gas as inputs to produce hydrogen, right? So you're essentially, and this is where me being an economist takes over and not an engineer, so please don't judge me too harshly. But essentially you take the methane and you split off some hydrogen atoms and you make hydrogen that is sort of usable in industry. Electrolysis is a process where you just use electricity, right? No natural gas as an input. And then your traditional sort of SMR, blue hydrogen type activity is different.
Well, I
sort of
trade in
heat-related.
words, so I'm in your debt now. That it's a new word and I enjoy it. Thank you.
You're all good. Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I think the idea here, very flexible products, right? You can design these things in a lot of different ways. I've seen setups that are like a building you'd have to build on site. I've seen other site setups that are like a container storage unit, right? Like something very containerized. Does anyone have any thoughts on like where a containerized solution might be handy or not handy?
Come again?
So if you had a solution that was containerized, think like a big 40-foot shipping container. Can you think of a setting where that would be more welcome than, say, a factory? Off-grid. Oh, yeah, actually, that's kind of cool. Desalination. Fair enough. That makes sense that you're into that. Mobile sites or remote sites. What about Walmart? What if you want to set up one of these things at Walmart?
Can you make it good to look at? I mean, otherwise, I feel like you want to stick in a field maybe. Where
yeah, but the shipping containers, you can stick them right behind a Walmart, right? All those Walmarts have parking garages in the back, or not parking garages, parking lots. Yeah. So, these containerized solutions, they're suitable for certain environments. They're maybe not suitable if you're trying to do really high volume production or highly irregular production, right? Because you can't get a lot of storage on site unless you really heavily invest in that. So there's certain, settings and industries and conditions that these solutions play better or worse to. Ocean liners, that's actually a really interesting example. I had not thought of that. Expeditionary forces, the military invests in this type of stuff all the time. So if you talk to DoD, right, they make investments in kind of wild things like wave power converters, right? So devices you'd stick offshore, use waves because they need the power in remote environments. You can do the same thing with hydrogen for difficult to decarbonize activities that the industry might do, that the military might be doing somewhere, right? So you can imagine like a base setup somewhere. They need natural gas to run stoves or a boiler for hot water or whatever. They can get some solar panels and electrolysis system out there and operate that in a remote environment. So there are a lot of good sort of niche examples for distributed hydrogen production and use. Centralized hydrogen production and use, that's more of a utility game, right? They're going to be blending that along pipelines. It's a totally different set of questions. And the point here is that, the technology that you choose to work on and the engineering of the technical solution or the commercial solution that you're talking about really influences where it's going to go in the end. And so you want to think hard about, why you chose to design something in a certain way or why a product is a certain way. And then what are the settings where that product has an opportunity to excel, right? You want to keep a very close eye on sort of the specific application and sort of the niche that you're going to sit in market. So the last slide here that I'll show is a rainbow slide. So we're looking at all the different colors of hydrogen. If you guys were talking to my colleague Lindsay, who is our resident hydrogen engineering expert, she hates the colors. And the reason she hates the colors is the colors mean nothing. So if you want to decarbonize natural gas, right, it doesn't actually matter if your process is blue, turquoise, teal, green. There's also like pink, right, nuclear, I believe. There's a bunch of different colors. It actually doesn't matter. What matters is what your fuel stocks are, what you're doing with the carbon that's produced, and then how you're using the hydrogen. Right? You want to use the hydrogen to displace natural gas intensive activities. You want to use fuel stocks that are, you want to like lean electric maybe with some opportunity for pyrolysis for production of hydrogen with methane. But you want to be able to take that methane, collect it, and get rid of it in some capacity, like we were mentioning earlier. So, this is just a breakdown of different vendors in different production spaces. And then we talk a little bit about each production space and where it might be more or less ideal for deployment. So you can understand sort of the TRL of each space there at the bottom, and then where it might sit best in industry. Does anyone have any questions about hydrogen? Was there anything that I missed mid-presentation?
You might have mentioned it, but what about safety in transportation with this? I know that in certain states it could be pretty volatile. Not a chemist though.
Yeah, yeah. Also not a chemist, so you caught me there. No, transportation of hydrogen is a task and a half. So, there's issues with pipeline embrittlement. So that's on the pipeline side, which is of course a utility question. If you're talking more about just storage and use of hydrogen on site, that's less of a problem. So, and the reason for that is, you use steel pipes for natural gas transmission. And those steel pipes get super messed up with hydrogen. You have this problem called embrittlement, where the steel becomes very brittle, and if you hit it with a hammer, boom.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, not that awesome. But if you're on a small industrial site, you're much more flexible, right? You can use different materials to move the hydrogen to your end function. Also, you can place your end function really close to the hydrogen. So transportation can be made less of a barrier.
How concerning is degradation? Oh, and someone else's hand went up. I'll mute myself.
Go for it. You're all good. Dimitri?
Yeah, okay, you can continue. But I have a related question to this. There is a lot of debate on the marketplace on why we abandon nuclear power, right? It's a clean energy, but it has been used for the wrong reasons in many cases. And the hydrogen is similar to that because there are hydrogen bombs. So how do you get away from that bad advertisement of the products, which is at a very large scale, and that is related to safety, and that can be used for military uses more than for just powering things?
Yeah, for sure. No, so I think you mentioned sort of a broad cultural maybe disdain. I don't know if that's the right word for nuclear, and maybe a similar type skepticism for hydrogen. And so what I'd say is, if you think about the niche, that really gets you out of that problem to a certain extent. So, if your question is, will hydrogen be the next natural gas in pipelines all around the United States? I have no idea, and I think that's a big, big question, and no one can answer that question. But what I do think is, if your question is something a little bit more limited, something along the lines of, hey, can hydrogen have a reasonable application in textile mill settings where they have to burn off the pilings on fabric, right? You wear a sweater too long, it gets pilings. They have burners that burn those off. Can you use hydrogen to power those burners? Probably, right? You could probably redesign that. And so being able to essentially confine your problem and make it not something of, hey, is this a globe changing or a world changing solution? Or changing the question from, is it a world changing solution to, is this a solution that is applicable in a specific setting? And being very careful about that setting, right? Walmart, they're not going to build a plant next door to their buildings. They don't have the real estate to do that. Real estate buying doesn't take place like that. They need a containerized solution, right? So if you think about containerized solutions, it's like, oh, that's like a very mass market application, right? There's a lot of Walmarts and Targets out there. The last thing I'd note is, like, oftentimes the things that matter most are the most obvious, and that's a super obvious statement to say. But the example here that I'll give with hydrogen is, like, if you're running a turquoise or blue process, right? So this is pyrolysis or just straight up natural gas as a feedstock, right? If you're running one of these processes, what is the most important part of that? Can anyone think of that? And it's really obvious, like profoundly obvious. It's like in the name. You need natural gas, and that means you need a pipeline, right? So if you're trying to set up something, some sort of hydrogen facility to power like a remote cell site, you're never going to do that with a pyrolysis or a pyrolysis process. It's just never going to happen because we don't run natural gas lines to cell phone sites on top of mountains, right? So you want to be very careful about, like, this sort of big inputs to your industrial processes or to whatever technical process you're looking at, and how it applies to industry. It's super important. Any other questions? Happy to like discuss if anyone, I don't know, did that answer that question?
So my mind goes to some of the business side of things. And
Yeah.
if I look at all of these logos and things, any sense of how much capital was invested aggregately in all of these companies? And how much, if you have any sense of how much of that was government versus private? Any
Oh.
research you've done in that space? Because it
Yeah,
just seems like a massive amount that Joe, like Joe Chemist coming out of the university, you know, how would he get access to that capital? That would be my question.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think, yeah, a lot of universities have accelerator programs to address Joe Chemist's needs. But I would also say, you know, in terms of like the amount of capital being invested in this, you know, we have a slide somewhere and I did not include it, showing, you know, rough comparisons of investments. I don't have it stratified by government or the private sector, but it's in the billions, not like high billions, but like low billions for hydrogen specifically. But of course, that's all hydrogen technologies. And there's a lot of hydrogen technologies, right? So yeah, in terms of how to get a hold of capital and how to attract capital, you know, there's a sort of fleshed out business process that I am maybe not an expert in, but if you spoke to some sort of venture cap person or someone working in that industry, you know, they would tell you about it. These are things like, you know, Series A, Series B.
It was sort of a loaded question. It was a question to see whether or not you'd looked at it from the investment perspective. You know, we're all helping clients with access
sure.
to this plan and their capital such.
Yeah. The only
there's
perspective we look at it through is our client's perspective. So when utilities think about this technology, what are they looking for? You know, and what they're looking for are technologies that are mature enough to deploy, perhaps not quite mature enough to scale, mature enough to not be dangerous. You know, they don't want to cause public incidents, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but also SoCal Gas wants to know if they can compete because they're worried about losing a ton of their revenue. Because if everything converts to EV, then they're out of the game. I mean, if all of transportation converts to EV, and most of manufacturing converts to some type of something that's powered through an electricity provider, then what's SoCal Gas good for? I mean, they're already doing these you know, they're already rebelling against the electric stove push that's happening in many cities and jurisdictions. So
Yeah.
I mean, like, and it's tough. I mean, we've been having these meetings around the Inland Empire with elected officials and at all levels, and you know, the reality is that this is kind of like back in the old days. I mean, I know most of the students remember this because they were probably not born, but like, you know, the consumer and the businesses are going to decide, just like was, you know, like Sony, just like with VHS and Betamax, right? It's like Betamax was a superior technology, but VHS won because that's what the consumer wanted. And the same thing's going to happen with truck drivers and the entire, you know, we have a lot of, you know, much of our economy in Inland Empire is based around logistics and shipping. And so we've been having these meetings there, and the elected officials are like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Are we supposed to install a hydrogen pipeline through the Inland Empire? Are we supposed to put more, you know, EV chargers that are good for semi-size? You know, and so there's all this debate going on right now, which I'm sure you're aware of since SoCal Gas is one of your clients. But anyway, it's really interesting to see kind of how it's going to all play out and which technologies are going to win.
Yeah, yeah. And if you keep that in mind, right, I think all of you are working on something that's tangentially hydrogen based, right?
We're working on all of it. We're working on battery technology, EV technology, hydrogen. I mean, basically every type of climate. We have startups that we mentor in all of the different verticals. So yeah, we're working on all of it basically.
Right. So if your options are to talk to EIX or SoCal Gas, one of those two is going to be more motivated to talk to you. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So thinking about sort of who are the buyers, who's incentivized to buy from you, and even sort of more meta questions, right? Who's threatened by the fact that something else is happening that could potentially benefit from your solution, right?
Yeah. And who's going to make the hydrogen semis and hydrogen trucks? Because right now, there's not enough people making them, and they don't exist. I mean, I should say they do exist but like, so the point is just like, it's really going to be interesting to see kind of how this scales. If you look at the hydrogen cars so far, the consumers haven't embraced them and they've been a complete and utter failure, versus
Scott,
the electric cars of the world. So it's just interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me back of the IT days, and I'll use the example. If you went to a conference, you had technologies, and you had a group of technologists at a table, and they're arguing over my technology is better than your technology. And at the end of the day, both teams were super talented, and they built a solution with whatever technology they started with, and they solved all the problems. And I kind of think the same is occurring in this industry. Those companies that solve the problem with the engineers and do it well, they'll be the technology that gets used. It doesn't mean that to Scott's point, the Betamax might go away. And so I guess the question though is it's a lot bigger dollars being spent on hardware than it is on moving software around. And so I think there's a lot more angst over, am I picking the right technology?
Yeah, I think that's fair. But that's again why making this question smaller, it helps, right? If you have a technology and you can be confident in at the very least a niche market application, that's better than having vague confidence in mass market.
Good point.
Hey, just a quick question, Nolan. As
Yeah.
far as one of the arguments that I just personally think is a waste of an argument, but the infrastructure isn't there for hydrogen, and so therefore we can never do anything with hydrogen.
Right.
Do you have any kind of analogy to the growth of the petroleum industry and the fact that 120 years ago there was no infrastructure for that either, and now look at the trillions upon trillions of total investment that exists there?
I would tell you instead to Google British town gas and read up on British town gas. So town gas, much like the wood gasifier I showed early in this presentation, town gas is basically doing the same thing with coal, right? So you superheat coal, basically you put coal in an oven, bake it. That coal lets off volatilized particles. Those particles are piped to homes, and then you can run stoves off them. Now, you guys all, okay, not everyone has a gas stove at home, but for those who have seen gas stoves, the little burner devices on top of the gas stoves, the little metal things that distribute the gas equally and allow the burner to light up. So British town gas used to be the primary fuel for most homes for combustion in Britain. In, I want to say the 30s, maybe 20s, 30s, something like that. There was about I think 10 or 15 year period where the entirety of Britain's pipelines, ovens, all devices that combusted town gas were transitioned over to burning natural gas. And you had to do things like change those little devices on top of every burner that distribute the gas around, because you need to change the combustion topology to make it work with natural gas instead of town gas. And so, they did that on a county by county basis. It took them a long time. It was a huge investment, and they've been running on natural gas ever since. So, this is the sort of change that can be done, that does happen, not necessarily regularly, but it has happened and people have dealt with it. So it's not something that's, unfeasible. Yeah. The only reason I go away from the oil and gas example is that's like a slightly different application. I think this one's like precisely the same application, frankly.
Nolan, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Today we're talking about the business ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So in your case, who's your major positive influencer and who's your saboteur?
So sorry if I could ask a clarifying question. Is that for the company that I work for, or for me personally and spiritually? You are on mute, so sorry.
Keep muting myself. For your company.
Oh, we'd love to
Okay.
hear about you personally and spiritually as well.
But if you want to talk about personal, yeah. Well, no.
Yeah.
So,
I want to hear all of it now. This is
list them all.
Yeah, and this is our when you say our detractor, you're talking about like where we see, you know, problems and where we see good outcomes potentially.
Potentially, who would oppose?
Oh, okay, detractor, okay, on that side of things. Well, you know, in utilities, that's a really complex thing, right? So if you're trying to play with the energy game, you're going to run into a lot of interest groups because of the way the utility sector is regulated. So, you know, the projects that we work on, by nature of us being a company that provides services to utilities, essentially talking about you know, different engineered products they can buy. The problems we run into are people who don't want their bills to go up, right? So, and they don't want their bills to go up above all else, I would say. So that's a major problem, right? All activities by utilities in terms of capital investment, so buying machinery, buying products, all of that is sort of addable to a rate base, right? So utilities get directly compensated for that by end customers. And you know, there are a lot of advocacy groups around the state and around the country that essentially advocate to not do that because they think the utilities are doing it frivolously. And whether you think they're doing it frivolously or not is a completely different question. But, you know, those groups do push back against a lot of capital expenditures, I'd say. And then in terms of like major drivers of what we do, honestly, policy. Policy drivers are big. And, you know, among utility folks, if you speak to, you know, teams that are working on implementation of novel technologies, they are aware of and driven by, to a significant extent, their state's net zero goals, right? You know, I think, you know, sometimes these net zero goals and policies, both at the state level, federal level, whatever, they're kind of laughed at for being kind of non-binding in their nature, and they are non-binding except to utilities. They're very binding to utilities because utilities get dinged based on how they stack up against this stuff, and they will get dinged in the future, right? PUCs, that's public utility commissions who govern utilities around the country, they're always on the lookout for when utilities are shirking public responsibility. And, you know, that is a huge positive driver for change.
Yes, Dimitri.
Yeah.
Yes. So in relation to that, as you know, energy and the example that you gave in Britain would be somehow involving the government here in the US and NIST and other standards and everything like this.
Mm-hmm.
You see the government in your case an ally and a good customer, or is that more a route that you don't want to deal with? You know, I still don't know the hate and love relationship with the government.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of complexity and I think nuance to that. So, you know, you have standards organizations. Those are not necessarily, but sometimes are in certain cases related to the government, right? And so I think, you know, these organizations that provide, you know, some people would argue that, you know, they provide scaffolding for industry to exist on, and that's probably the end of the spectrum that I come in on. Other people would argue, you know, something more along the lines of, you know, they act as a wedge to keep out new competitors, basically, right? That would be like the real polar opposite argument. I think it really depends on the context, right? So for hydrogen, right, if you're really behind trying to get hydrogen blends happening in natural gas pipelines, you really need some standard setting on the consumer appliance end of things, or else you are just in trouble, frankly, right? You need Kohler, Black & Decker, you need all of them to be standard, like you know, every model of stove they come out, they test it on 10 different hydrogen blends running up to 25% hydrogen. And you need that. Otherwise, the government is not going to allow you to sell consumer products that don't necessarily meet safety standards. So I would say, you know, it really depends on the circumstance and on who you're talking about. Yeah, I don't know. Does that answer that question? It's kind of a hard question.
it's a very complex question, but a very important one because the theme of our course is climate innovation. So how do we offset the negative impacts of increased fossil fuel burning and other negative things to keep the climate so it's livable for the inhabitants of the Inland Empire? And so what you're saying is, of course, your opinion depends on where you stand. If you're someone who's trying to, have a green economy, yeah, you'd like the government to intervene. And if you're someone who's, making billions off of fossil fuels, well, this is, an outrage to subsidize someone else because you've already subsidized us, and we're the kind of business that needs to, be protected and survive. Mm-hmm. So, but I think what most of the inventors in this class would like to be able to do is help the climate while still being able to make money. And so, but not everybody's going to get through that door of getting a government subsidy, because there's just in hydrogen, there's probably, as you can see here, 10 or 12 different verticals that could happen, and so how do we, if we were just going to look at the green section, like the climate innovation for green, how important is, what are the possibilities without heavy intervention from outside forces? What are the possibilities for commercialization, commercial viability?
For sure. And this is why making the question smaller is often my answer, right? What we see that makes the headlines are the big questions, and what we never see are the small questions. And the small questions are things like, does it make sense for a factory that produces, like Oregon Biochar, right? They produce really high quality biochar for use in wastewater treatment plant applications. Can they produce that biochar with hydrogen? And specifically to them, maybe they're using the maximum amount of natural gas you can get down their distribution line. And so if they want to get more gas, if they want to scale up their operations, they're going to have to pay a ton of money to get that line upgraded, because the utilities make individual customers, particularly industrial customers, do that. Maybe hydrogen doesn't make sense right now everywhere, but maybe it does make sense in Oregon Biochar's situation, right? Maybe they want to scale up some production and they just need, enough fuel to, get away from having to make that capital investment on a natural gas line. And so, being able to parse and pick apart those questions and say, hey, there are certain settings where this technology is useful, and then getting those implementations to take place, that's really important, because that's what de-risks everything for the rest of the market. So, we see a lot of like the SoCalGas team, right? RD&D, research, development, and demonstration. A big part of their job is just to prove technologies, prove that they can function, right? If you go to their offices in wherever their offices are east of downtown, you will see they have a big hydrogen house. And the idea is, they have a green hydrogen setup. It's solar powered electrolysis, hydrogen storage, and then they have a fuel cell, and they run a fireplace in the house and a bunch of other things off hydrogen, as well as generating electricity from the fuel cell. And, having an emergency setup like that, that's containerized, set up in a small neighborhood in California, does that make sense? There's probably some neighborhoods that would say yes. And so making the question smaller is where you start with these early stage technologies, I think.
Thank you for answering my question. Go ahead, Ben.
So you mentioned carbon capture. Are there modes of hydrogen production and expenditure that produce carbon in non-green ways? Like, are we going to see like rogue developments of carbon that are not green?
I mean, I don't think any more than in any other industry. So yes, but like, I don't know that it presents a unique and terrible danger compared to anything else. You might see people, making carbon, you make graphite basically, or some more impure version of graphite, and then just like, I don't know, sprinkling it on a hill somewhere or something, right? Not ideal necessarily. or you could have someone producing hydrogen through some sort of traditional SMR process, and they're generating their heat by combustion of natural gas. Regardless, what matters is the carbon intensity score, right? So like, I'm sure you guys have maybe talked about the clean fuel standards in California, Oregon, Washington, maybe. So the clean fuel standards mandate the carbon intensity of fuels for vehicles, right? And so that's a, an extensive economic evaluation process that every fuel has to go through in order to be sold for use in a vehicle. In California, Oregon, Washington, I think all have more or less the same regulation. And yeah, that's what matters at its core,
So then it also sounds like maybe carbon capture is not necessarily easier with hydrogen, but because we're thinking about designing it in from the beginning, that's part of what helps.
Yeah, I think sorry if that was the angle of your question. Carbon capture is kind of easier maybe if you're doing a pyrolysis technology, right? If you're doing electrolysis, there's no need for any of that, right? See, I mean, well, there's probably still need for it, but there's no need within that confined process that you're analyzing, right? So like electrolysis does not have carbon as a waste product except for the manufacture of the materials used to do the electrolysis. Methane pyrolysis, that's where you get like offshoots like graphite, graphene, black carbon, whatever.
Gotcha.
Ash.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I think we've exhausted our list of questions for you, Nolan, and you took on all comers successfully, and you made a great presentation, and you are a hydrogen savant. So I appreciate greatly. I don't know who knows more than you. Certainly no one I've ever met on this subject. So thank you. Unfortunately for myself, I listen at 33 RPM and you speak at 45.
Sorry. Yeah.
So, but I do understand that you really understand the intricacies of hydrogen, all the potential very well. And I think that through osmosis, we all learned quite a bit. And so I want to thank you for your time. And let's everyone give him a Zoom applause, however we can do that.
Thanks so much, everyone. Here,
Thanks, Nolan.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nolan. Really appreciate your doing this on your vacation. Thank you, sir.
I learned a lot, so thank you.
All right. So before we break out into our next groups, Steve, I wanted to ask you to help me with the teams. And what we've been working on is getting the customer discovery interviews of the teams to be a little, for some of the teams, some of you are right on target, some of you are still a little bit behind. And one of the main reason is that you've targeted a customer who's not responding. They're not responding positively, not responding quickly enough, not responding at all. And so we want to make sure that you have some alternatives to the main person who you're trying to reach. And one thing we talked about in our mentor meeting was reaching out to a different level of person. So for example, if you're trying to reach the director of procurement or the director of production, maybe it's time to switch over to someone who's in marketing or sales, someone who understands the product or the service of the company that you need to interview, but is not necessarily going to be a high-end decision maker. And so, but those people are more likely to be responsive because that's their business and they like talking. That's their nature. That's why they're in those positions. So we wanted to encourage everyone to reach out and stretch a little bit further than just the direct hit of who you'd like to talk to. So that was one thing that we talked about. Steve, did you want to add another? And then we'll
I would add, especially if you can get a hold of a competitor or a potential competitor and the salesperson there, those can be often excellent interviews because, as Jay points out, they're professional networkers. They like to talk. They know the market typically because that's their job. And they're in the business of satisfying customers, so they tend to be people pleasers, which means if they're willing to speak with you, they'll probably be very, very helpful because they're wired to be helpful. So that's a great place to reach out for. It's also opportune that this week we're working on ecosystems because you can also look in different parts of the ecosystem. As Jay points out, are there other people that have a point of view? Maybe they're not your direct customer or even the end user, but they might have a relevant perspective. In maintenance people, if you have a piece of technology that's hardware that's going to have to be maintained, well, you want to talk to maintenance people about that because they're going to have things they like and things they don't like, which could affect your design, as an example. So, it's never easy to get high quality interviews, but when you do, you can tell, and they're really worthwhile. And again, as we always tell people, your best source for interviews are people you've already spoken with. So be assertive about saying, you've been really helpful. Do you mind if I follow up if I have further questions based upon what you've discussed with me? One, and two, is there anybody else in your network that you'd recommend I speak with? And if somebody's been especially a good interviewee and they've been helpful, it's surprising how helpful people are willing to be. Sometimes they'll even warm up the contact for you. They might even be willing to not only give you the contact information, but also sometimes even leave an email introducing you to the prospect, which is fantastic because then your hit rate or your likelihood of securing that interview goes up much higher. The thing is, you have an extensive EIR network here. All of we who are mentors, want you to have as good an experience as possible, and we have our own networks. So it's just like anything else. You work your network. If you have a particular area or niche that you're working and a certain type of profile of interviewee you're looking for, it may well be that one of the mentors has contacts that could lead you there. So we just work this network as well. You can post on Basecamp. Hey, here's the type of people we're looking to speak with. Anybody know anybody like that? Anybody, could you help me track those folks down? And there's a reasonable chance that one of the EIRs at least might have some relevant contacts there. The best person to find, is if somebody who is a senior level person in a company that is a competitor that left recently. Sometimes I've been in interviews where we found people that left a company recently. They're going to be very open, typically if they've left. And ideally, even if they're technical or whether they're senior, if you can find people like that, and LinkedIn is a surprisingly good resource for finding things like that. You look at people that have a company background and you go and look them up. And if you see that they've left that company recently, as you do a scan by company or by industry, if you can track folks like that down, they're considerably less guarded generally than would be somebody who's still at the company. So those are just a couple of thoughts and practices to think about. And as Jay will remind you, and I think all your mentors will as well, your interviews are the lifeblood of this. The more you get, the more you can get as quickly as possible, the more you'll learn and the better you'll be able to think about your business plan, your business strategy, and the type of innovation or technology or invention that you're otherwise considering. So just got to work it out. I mean, if you're doing a B2C play, that's a lot easier. You can just go to places where consumers are or shop, just talk to people. But in B2B business, which most of you are going to be, it's more challenging. So you just got to keep at it. Ask your mentor for help. Ask the other mentors for help, and then work your networks. And again, as Jay pointed out, and as I've talked on as well, you've heard me talk on before. If you can find salespeople, they may be a useful interview themselves, or they may be a means to an end to find others in the industry who would be good people to speak with. So I'll shut up and see if Jay wants to add to that at all, or if there's any other area we want to talk about more on this topic.
Well, we are ready to move on to the next one, but I want to say a couple things and see if any other mentors wish to comment. One is that when you're done with your interview, in addition to asking for referrals, you can go up and down the same organization. So there could be someone who works at a different department or a different level within the organization that is going to be also useful and have information, because one person does not know everything about a company or how your technology might fit into that company. The other is something was offered to everyone, but I want to emphasize again, which is that if you wish to travel to a convention or a trade show that is in this area where potential customers are attending, that we can reimburse you for those expenses. And I know that we only have a few weeks left, so unless something's happening between Thanksgiving and New Year's, which are not prime seasons for trade shows, you wouldn't be able to do that. But for those who are going to certainly retail places, prime time for meeting people. So I encourage you to see where those things are. And we will extend this offer beyond the length of the workshop. So let's say Ben wanted to go to the Association of Water Desalination Engineers. We'll send him even though it's in March and the class has ended in December. And the same would apply to any of the other technologies that wish to follow up afterwards. So the course ends, but the project doesn't end. No one is done and ready to start a company on December 5th, I don't think. And so this is going to be a process. And those of you who are, came with your own technology, of course, you're going to continue. Those of you who are consultants from the business school, your project is over, but if you have interest in pursuing it further, we want to keep you on board, and we'll still continue to support you in whatever way makes sense. So that's all I've got to say. But before we move to the next section, does anyone want to make any comments?
Yeah, additionally, you need to get really good at using LinkedIn. So if you don't really understand LinkedIn, you've never really used it as a power user, it's worth it paying for whatever the cheapest, and it probably, especially if you're a student, I think you can get a discount. I think it's Sales Navigator's the cheapest monthly. Pay for the monthly and learn how to use it. You'll use it for the rest of your business career, as long as it's still around. Maybe it'll be replaced by something, but right now it is the best business tool you have to connect with people for your startup. So that's something you should also add into your mix. Get really, really, really good at using LinkedIn.
And if you're new to it, if you've not done Sales Navigator before, the first 30 days are free. So as an example, and I think, Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a time in which an upgrade in LinkedIn for purposes of market discovery was an allowable submissible expense that could be repaid to the participant within the time frame of this course. Is that still the case, or is that no longer the case?
I think it's not, but I can certainly look into it. But in any case, we have 30 days and we don't need 30 days.
Yeah,
so
the first 30 days are free. Yeah.
And if there's some sort of onslaught of people wanting to do it,
yeah,
I'll go back to the procurement people and say, can we still do it or do it again? I'm not opposed to doing it, but I think they did take it away. Not sure why.
But Scott's spot on. When I'm doing stuff like this, or whether it's national ICOR where you're doing 100+ interviews in 7 weeks, or what we do here, or something in between, if you can get LinkedIn is a great place, especially early in the process, and then subsequent to that, LinkedIn stays a good resource. But then again, the people you've spoken with, already interviewed, those are great sources for new interviews. So that's a 1-2 punch: LinkedIn and folks you've already spoken with.
I just have one caveat. If you're on the receiving end of those services, you get inundated.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be. It's true. I'm not saying necessarily to. Usually, you want to do well. Anyway, we can do it like a LinkedIn power user thing. If anyone's, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I help startups raise capital. That's what I do. Venture capital, angel capital. I use LinkedIn every single day, literally every day, all day long. And I'm just saying that, and also when I've done 6 tech startups, I use LinkedIn for every single startup. Well, some of my startups, I'm so old that some of my startups, LinkedIn didn't exist when I did some of my startups. So, but anyway, the point is, I know a lot of people, especially if you're an engineer or you're someone technical, I know you hate networking, and I hear from founders all the time, LinkedIn sucks, networking sucks, it's a waste of time, it's stupid. I'm telling you, if you don't do it, you're not going to build a successful tech company. It's impossible to do. And LinkedIn is just one of many, many tools that you'll want to start to get good at if you want to build a successful startup. So just something to think about.
So Scott mentioned maybe doing a power workshop on how to use LinkedIn. And so Scott, if you want to put something in Basecamp of, maybe a potential date and time for that, I'll go, and I would encourage everyone else to go, and we'll just talk a little bit about it sooner rather than later. So maybe next week sometime would be great. I mean, we're not gonna do it on Thanksgiving, so maybe the week after.
I was thinking like Thanksgiving evening, maybe, or no, of course not.
Yeah, and the other thing is, we are not selling anything. So although John says some people don't want to hear from us, but we're students who are asking for help. We want to gather and get information. We're not pushing any solutions. We're not, asking for an appointment to sell them something. So I think we get a little more sympathetic response than the average.
That was said in jest. I was basically sarcastically saying how powerful it is it gets out there. You get you get pinged, and it's awesome.
Yeah. I would just echo what Scott said, that LinkedIn is fantastic. I certainly use Sales Navigator, and for every call I ever do, I now use ChatGPT or Bing, I should say Bing, to summarize the LinkedIn profile and the company profile and tell me, topics that might be of interest to the persons based on their title. It's pretty phenomenal what you can do.
Okay, so we definitely spent a good full half hour, actually up to an hour on this topic. So I think it's time to break up into our breakout sessions. And I noticed that some people are not here. So we'll figure out based on who is going to each room, we'll have to elect a monitor. So Francis and I can be two of them, but we'll still need a third room. So
Jay, quick question. When we organize a session with the LinkedIn, would someone be able to actually talk about ChatGPT as well?
maybe, depends who shows up.
Okay. I think it's a tool that is very attractive, very powerful, but also very scary. I mean, I'm scared to use it, but I think that if someone knows how to use it correctly, I would really love to, be, taught some basic things. Thank you.
Sure. I can offer myself up to talk about ChatGPT. I've been using it, been watching YouTube videos to keep up, and I just used their latest feature to create a custom chat bot to do the Lean Business Canvas, and impressed with what it can do.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so thank you for volunteering to do that, Philip. And I'm using Bard pretty much every day. Whenever I get a complex question, rather than use my brain, I use Bard. So it helps.